Okay, good evening, everyone. And that was a bit of a sobering message that Rachel shared with us there, but an important one once again. If I'm not mistaken, I think she's actually from a Cohen family, Rachel's family. Okay, so last week when we started with our study, with the preparation for all the wars and stuff, we studied how what was happening in the Decapolis cities to this, to the what's it, the east of Galilee and north. And tonight we're going to continue with one of those Decapolis cities. We're going to talk about Damascus at first, and then we're going to follow the war as it comes down into the Galilee. So just a heads up once again before we start. Apologies if it looks like I'm going to be just reading a bunch of historical stuff to you tonight, but we are studying some historical stuff, Josephus's War of the Jews. So please excuse me for that, but we'll try and get you guys involved and ask you some questions here and there as well. All right, so let's get started. Let me share with you guys the booklet for this week. And we're starting off with the war as it culminated before it came to Galilee, with the slaughter in Damascus, one of the 10 Decapolis cities as well, right? So that's what she spoke about here in the video. She mentioned that they actually rounded us up and slaughtered us. Here it tells us a little bit of the story. So when the news about the defeat of the 12th Legion came to Damascus, that's just the portion we studied last week, the citizens in that city followed the example of other cities in Syria as well. They rounded up their local Jewish community and cooped them together in the gymnasium of Damascus. They made no distinction between disciples of Yeshua and any other Jews. So listen to what Josephus says here. We've got the quotes here for us from two different sections. First of all, he says, those who dwelt in the neighboring cities of Syria seized upon such Jews that dwelt among them with their wives and children and slew them, even though they did not have a single legitimate complaint against them. The only crime was being Jewish. Neither did the Jews attempt any sedition or revolt from the Romans, nor had they given any indications of hatred or treacherous designs towards the Syrians. They just killed us for the sake of being Jewish. He also says there was not any one Syrian city which did not slay their Jewish inhabitants. They bore a more bitter enmity towards us than the Romans themselves. These are the Syrians. Okay, so this is what was going on there during that time as well. So there was this massive hatred going across the entire world at that stage. Okay, so we're talking about Damascus. Question number one is, when did the gospel message first come to Damascus? It tells us about in Acts chapter 9, verse 2. It happened quite earlier. It happened after the persecution associated with Stephen. Stephen the martyr, after Stephen was persecuted. So you'll remember in Acts chapter 9, it tells us the story of Paul before he became a believer. He was still persecuting the early believers, and he actually went to the Kohen Gadol, and he got a letter from the Kohen Gadol with permission to go to Damascus, where they heard about these guys following Yeshua. Outside of Jerusalem. And he wanted to go there specifically, and he wanted to get permission from the Kohen Gadol to arrest the believers there in Damascus. So the Kohen Gadol wrote him a little letter. Remember, the Kohen Gadols were the corrupt Sadducees. So the fact that Paul, who was a Pharisee of Pharisees, went to a Sadducean Kohen Gadol just shows you what hatred does to a person. Usually the Sadducees and the Pharisees hate each other's guts. But if hatred, the friend of my, the enemy of my friend, that whole story, they helped each other to get their enemy. So he got that letter and he went off to Damascus to try and catch the Christians or the early believers. Just up north in Antioch was the first place we ever got called Christians, right? Anyway. But on the way there, that's where Paul had his Damascus Road encounter, where he had the vision of Yeshua, and he said, stop persecuting my people, and he made him blind, and Paul was blind for 3 days. And Baruch Hashem, he met one of the believers in Damascus, Hananiah. Yeshua went and spoke to Hananiah in a vision as well, and told him to look after Paul. This guy's going to be the one that I send unto the Gentiles. And look at all the good that came from that. But that's how early this happened already, right? So the believers in Damascus were some of the first believers as well, because it was just a stone throw away from Syrian Antioch. Okay, question number 2. According to Josephus, why did the Gentile citizens of Damascus distrust their own wives? Something's going on here. This is one of the original versions of the Real Housewives of Damascus. All right, so why did the Gentile citizens of Damascus distrust their wives? Josephus tells us because the woman had religious sympathies with the Jewish community and Judaism. These Syrians couldn't figure out why, but all of a sudden, all of their wives started studying this Jewish stuff. Sabbath, kosher. What's going on here? All these Gentile Syrian wives all of a sudden started following the Jewish stuff. A very strange phenomenon that I would argue still happens till this very day. I don't know how many times you encounter people here in our congregation where usually it's the wife that pitches up first and the husband's very stubborn with all sorts of issues. The same thing happens till this very day. Now, one of the reasons, we started this in the past, one of the reasons why Judaism was so attractive in that world at that stage was because of the women's rights that were put forth in the Torah that you didn't find in Roman society in that day and age. Okay, so that's one of the reasons why. But I think there's also some spiritual aspects to the reason why so many ladies got involved with Judaism and studying the Torah and learning the lessons from our patriarchs and matriarchs. So yeah, interesting that that was happening at that stage. Okay, question number 3. According to Josephus, which types of Jewish practices did God-fearing Gentiles typically adopt there in Syria? God-fearing Gentiles. They adopted calendar observances and dietary laws. These wives of these guys. So they started keeping Sabbath and festivals and fast days on the Jewish calendar. Strange, right? And they started keeping certain elements of kashrut, of keeping kosher. Does that sound familiar? It's the modern messianic movement way back then already taking place over there. So it's amazing to see that Josephus himself already picked this up in these societies, that these Gentiles were starting to keep kosher and started keeping the Sabbath and the festivals and the fast days as well. It's actually amazing to see that. Okay, so that's the story of what happened in Damascus. There was this massive massacre where they killed off their entire Jewish population. So here's a group discussion, and it'll be interesting to pick your minds on this one. Speculate about how the massacres in the diaspora cities, the ones we learned about last week, and of course in Damascus, might have impacted the development of early Christian identity. What do you guys think all of this stuff did to the early God-fearers that believed in Yeshua, and how it influenced them, and maybe what it did a few years down the line? Any ideas? What do you guys think? Can you imagine it happening to you today? If all of a sudden the government brings in rules and stuff and says you're not allowed to keep Saturday as your day of worship. I've heard people speak about the fact that it's probably conspiracy theory, but anyway, that they want to make sure that only Sunday is the only day you're allowed to have one religion, all that stuff. If it was to happen to us in our day and age, how many people do you think would still remain committed to the God of Israel, non-Jews? Very interesting. Barent, good evening. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's just uh, if you're being persecuted for being deemed or seen to be a Jew or performing Judaism, then you would start to change certain things so that you're not being associated. And that's all over the church history. You can see the the laws that the Caesars and later on Constantine put into place for the believers who wanted to keep basically Sabbath and the feast. They had to distance themselves, otherwise they would lose their property, their basic rights as well. And it already started in 66.
Yeah, that's very early, hey? I mean, we talk about Constantine, which is what, 325 around there when they had that Council of Nicaea. This is way before that already. So yeah, but I guess they would have had to do it for self-preservation. In a sense, we always give Christianity or Christian history, we give it a lot of stick, but at the same time, we don't realize what's going on here, that their families are being massacred and put to death simply for being interested in this Jewish stuff, keeping the Sabbath, trying to stay kosher. I mean, that's a big, 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 big sacrifice to make with your family over something that in your generation, you're the first ones maybe in your family to start keeping the Sabbath, especially those guys. I mean, today we're what, 2,000 years in. Christianity's gone to every corner of the earth. Now people always say, if your mother would find out the Jewish stuff you're doing today, she would turn around in her grave. Those oaks were straight pagans that came straight into this religion of becoming a God-fearer and then learning about the message of Yeshua. So yeah, very interesting, hey? So yeah, definitely you would have to end up disassociating yourself with the Jewish stuff or disavowing it as a sense of self-preservation, I guess, hey? So, in a sense, we shouldn't give some people too much stick until we find ourselves in their exact same kosher shoes. Interesting to think about, hey? Thanks for bringing that up. Gideon, good evening. Go ahead.
Good evening, Sid. Good evening, Torah clubbers. Yeah, so you hinted at the idea that you see a similar thing, maybe, or you might see a similar thing in Christianity today if you reverse the roles. But it just made me think that the idea probably generalizes well. The effect of persecution is the tendency to hide those elements that put you in the spotlight. Now I'm thinking of some other Jewish friends of ours that we've met that's not messianic. Um, and it was interesting. The guy grew up in Israel, and in his family there was a tendency to not name the Jewish boys using common Jewish names. Um, and various elements that they don't want to show basically their Jewish identity for fear of getting persecuted. So I think it's somewhat normal, I suppose, that that thing can happen.
Mm. Another thing we saw happen a lot as well is that many Jews changed their surnames when they fled Europe and they came into the new cities. They changed their surnames. Like I think my family's surname was also changed at one point. Someone took on the name of the city we fled from. So our surname is Gordon because we come from a city called Grodno in Lithuania. So many people did that as well, right? They try and cover yourself up just for the sake of not encountering persecution. I think another interesting thing they're trying to bring out here with the study, with the section of Damascus, is the idea that the believers, the Gentile believers, also then in turn ended up distancing themselves from the Jews themselves and alienating the Jews from them as well, while still doing their practice. And that's also very problematic from a theological perspective, right? Because if you're going to start, you're still new to the religion, you're trying to figure out this thing about the one true God and trying to understand Paul's letters. Once you separate yourself from a Jewish community with a Jewish mindset and understanding and all these things, and you try to interpret this all on your own, you're going to come up with all the problems that we see today in the church when they're misinterpreting all the scriptures of the Bible once again. That's why Paul says, Paul that says it, that all the oracles and the mysteries are given to the Jews. So maybe you should go there and understand Midrash, and then you'll be able to understand what Yeshua was doing with all these parables, right? Otherwise, you're going to misinterpret everything completely. So that was another thing that was forming that early already here in the 60s Common Era that was already starting to, cause a schism between the God-fearers. So it's one of those things that happens. So we need to keep it in mind as we continue studying as well. So yeah, unfortunately, it happened then. It still happens today. And I think with the video we watched earlier with Rachel talking about what's happening in the world today and the anti-Semitism that's being allowed to spread because nobody's standing up to defend the Jews, I think that's a big message as well. We spoke about that uprising there in Germany with the intermarriages where the lady said, hey, we want our Jewish husbands back, even though we're not Jewish. I don't know of any massive protests that are, actually impactful currently protecting the Jews in different countries. Yes, there's one or two Israel days and walks and these things, but they end up getting attacked by the ISIS guys in our country anyway. So, at the same time, we should ask the question today. It's exactly the same thing. Where is the support, the public support, and the outcry for why things like our government are supporting these terrorists left, right, and center? It's something we see happening over and over again, even in our day and age. Very, very concerning. But then again, of course, we've got beautiful stories of the righteous Gentiles from the Holocaust and all those stories. And right now as well, there is pockets helping out everywhere. So Baruch Hashem for those individuals. May God bless them and continue their work. All right, so let's get into something else that happened just a little bit next to Damascus, up in Antioch. So there's a guy in Antioch, a Jewish guy whose name was, funny enough, Antiochus. What a good name for a Jew. Antiochus of Antioch. Remember, there's a few Antiochs, right? But there's a Syrian Antioch, and then there's the Pisidian Antioch up in Turkey. This is Syrian Antioch. So remember, there were three major centers of Judaism in the world at that stage, and early Christianity as well. It was, of course, Jerusalem, Syrian Antioch, and in Egypt, in Alexandria. Those were the three main centers of the Yeshua movement, the biggest amount of believers and Jews in the Roman world at that stage. So in Syrian Antioch, unfortunately, we had this guy by the name of Antiochus rise up to power. Okay, so let me read to you guys a little bit about what he got up to. Here we go. So As the Jewish revolt broke out, an influential Jewish apostate from Judaism named Antiochus rose up and falsely accused several visiting Judeans of plotting to burn the city down. So this was a Jewish guy, but he was a apostate. He forgot his Judaism. He became a pagan and started worshipping the pagan gods, and he rose up to become a leader in the city. And he falsely accused several visiting Judeans of plotting to burn down his city. Doesn't that sound familiar? Yes, a Roman emperor just did that a few years earlier. The people of Antioch burned the visitors alive. Men who may well have been apostles bringing news from Pella to the local believers. As Nero had done in Rome, it appears that Antiochus over here accused the Christians of arson as well, or at least planning arson. He instructed the Antiochians to test these people. He said, if a suspected man refuses to worship our gods, then you know he is among the arsonists. Why was that the test that he carried out? Because remember, it would have proven if they were local Antiochians, because by imperial law, they had to worship an image of the emperor. So they would actually bring an idol before the person. Very often what Nero did was he made sure that all the idols around the Roman Empire actually had his face on it, and people would have to bow down to the idol of the emperor. So this is how you would test if these people are, are legitimate citizens of the Roman Empire, or if they are hiding some other religion, which was, of course, was a problem. So remember what Nero did to the Christians there with the circus that he had, where he burnt the Christians alive and made it completely illegal to believe in anything in Christianity. And he killed off all the Christians in Rome when he ended up killing Peter and Paul. This was carrying out throughout the Roman Empire at this stage. So they were trying to target the Christians over here. Okay, so Josephus records, when the people of Antioch tried the experiment, a few people complied by sacrificing to the idols, but those who refused to do it were slain. Now the question is, who specifically are these people? Now, these idols that they brought up, it probably included Nero's image to determine loyalty to Caesar, but those who refused to worship this image of the beast were put to death on the spot. Antiochus the apostate also introduced legislation that made it illegal to rest on the seventh day. So this was in the year 66 Common Era. He made it illegal to keep Shabbat in the city of Antioch. Okay, now imagine you guys leave on a Saturday morning from your houses wanting to come to shul, and you've got these metro police waiting to see you, to see if you're driving with a kippah on or something, coming to shul, and they will arrest you and put you to death if you don't worship an idol. That's what was going on. This law spread to other cities in Syria. Josephus says the rest of the seventh day was abolished, not only in Antioch, but the same thing which first began there was also done in other cities in like manner. So they made keeping Shabbos illegal. Okay, so which three cities was the center of the Yeshua movement in the Apostolic era? We mentioned it now. It was Jerusalem, Syrian Antioch, and Alexandria in Egypt. Who was this Antiochus guy? He was a Jewish apostate from Judaism, a self-hating Jew. They exist even in the world today. You can see many of them talking on, on social media. Bernie Sanders, there's one example of them. There's many of them all over the world. Question number 3. Why do the idolatry test and the Sabbath law both appear to be aimed directly at Gentile God-fearers, specifically Gentile disciples? So here's the thing, right? You would think, okay, well, he forbid Sabbath keeping, so all the Jews are now done with, and he made them worship idols. Jews aren't allowed to worship idols, obviously, so it's a big problem. One thing we need to remember is that, under imperial decree, the Jews living in the Roman Empire were exempt from those laws. Way back in the beginning of, was it Claudius, when Claudius was in charge already, actually before him, but Claudius is the one who put it in rule, imperial decree, the Jews were exempt from having to worship the idols, even the emperor. So what they did back then was they made this deal that, don't worry, what we're going to do is we're going to perform a sacrifice in the temple for the emperor every day in Jerusalem. And they said, okay, fine, we'll accept that. But we were exempt from having to worship idols. A citizen of Rome who's not Jewish, who doesn't worship idols, he can be brought to trial to try and find out if he's sort of following some weird religion. So the Jews were exempt from this. Similarly, the Sabbath, the Jews were allowed to take the Sabbath off by imperial decree in the Roman Empire. And those laws were still in place at this time. So what Josephus is telling us about here is not the regular Jews, that were forced to do this test of bowing before an idol and sacrificing to it, or were forced to not keep the Sabbath, because the Jews were exempt from that in the first place. It's specifically talking about the God-fearers, the Gentiles in his communities who forsook idolatry and started following the one true God of Israel. They were now being tested to see if they would bow down to an idol and stop keeping the Sabbath. That's what was going on here. So you can imagine how difficult it would have been for a God-fearer at that stage. A God-fearer who in his lifetime just forsook idolatry and turned to the one true God of Israel. They come and give him the test and saying, if you want to live, sacrifice to these idols or die. That's why Josephus tells us, many of them actually did end up sacrificing to idols on the spot there to preserve their life as well. Okay, interesting to know the history behind it. Hey, so that's how difficult it was for the early believers to continue believing in the one true God and studying the Torah, keeping things like Shabbos and kosher and all these things, and not pursuing idolatry. It was immensely difficult to remain a believer as a Gentile during this time. All right, so speculate about how the law, let's hear your opinions on this. Speculate about how the law against observance of the Sabbath might have impacted the development of early Christian identity. What do you think the ripple effect is of that law that was brought in, not just in Syria, but as it went out to all the cities as well, and its influence on the early Christian identity? Beyond what we discussed this already in the first one, but there's a Sabbath element to this as well. What do you guys think the ripple effect was from that? Hello, Willem, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Dodgy. I think if you're not allowed to rest on the Sabbath by decree of the law, then of course another day would suffice in their mind. So I suppose that the Sunday observance could start partially, even though Augustine many years later implemented it legally. I think started there, or it's likely to start there.
I'm so sorry. I didn't hear a thing there. I heard blah, 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 blah. You were speaking in tongues. Once again, it's breaking up. Do us a favor. Write your answer there in the chat box, and then I'll read it up when I see it there in the chat box. But thank you for that, Willem. Barend, go ahead.
Yeah, as soon as you are forced, especially at that stage, to worship or to come together on a different day than the Sabbath, you separate yourself from the original. And the Sabbath is the first. Then starts the rest to follow. Then the feast and everything. And when you look at the church as a communal entity, and you look at Judaism in its communal entity, you cannot believe that Christianity ever started from Judaism, because you can't see there's no compatibility. And you started with one thing, and that's the Sabbath. If it didn't move away from the Sabbath, the divide wouldn't have been that big.
I think that's also, we look at the study of there was a group of Christians that still kept, remember we call them the quartodecimans, the 14ers, the quartodecimans, because they still kept the Jewish calendar and still kept Passover on the Hebrew calendar, the 14th of Nisan. That's why they're called quartodecimans. And there was a whole argument back when it was the whole Council of Nicaea thing about whether they should follow the Jewish calendar or the Gregorian calendar, and then they decided against that. So once again, those guys were trying to hold on to the Jewish calendar and those things, but majority of Christianity turned on them basically. I want to read to you over here what's written in the text, because it's exactly what you just discussed there as well, about that unhitching themselves from it caused them to, as soon as you get away from the Sabbath, it's a problem. The Sabbath is really this intrinsic connection to Hashem himself. Okay, so it says here, let's start over here actually. These events help explain how it's possible that only one generation later, the Bishop of Antioch. So the Bishop of Antioch, we're going to learn about him a few weeks from now, by the name of Ignatius could have such a low view of the Sabbath and Judaism. We're going to read about his writings as well in the future lessons of the Torah Club. The stuff that he says about the Sabbath and those Jews, those pesky Jews. He talks very bad about Jews and Judaism and their faith and the Sabbath. He's one of those guys that talks about keeping the Sabbath is basically like nailing Yeshua to the cross. This is only one generation later in that city in Antioch that the bishop was already writing these things about that. That's how early on it happened. The persecution and the new laws compelled the God-fearing Gentile believers to find justification for disassociating from Jewish practice. Believers could point to the teachings of the Apostle Paul and with very little effort misinterpret them to provide the necessary theological justification for abandoning Jewish practices and separating from the Jewish people. See how easy it is to happen when you separate yourself from Judaism, Jewish people, and Jewish understanding. By the time Ignatius became the bishop of Antioch, those misinterpretations had become institutional in Christianity. That's scary, okay? Very scary. But now you know a little bit of the background about where it came about. Barend, go ahead.
Yeah, there's just another thing I want to add, which we tend to forget. There's two other things that have made Gentile believers get in conflict with Rome. One is they believe that there is a king or emperor higher than Caesar, and that king is the king of the eternal kingdom. And that's exactly what Rome says. Rome says the Caesar is the emperor of the eternal kingdom that cannot be destroyed. And now the new believers in the nations says that basically the opposite, and that also brought conflict between Rome and the believers because of their viewpoint. The Jews did not say that blatantly because they did not believe that Yeshua was the Messiah and the king that will come again. That's why the non-Jewish believers were in direct conflict with Rome on a political basis, if you put it that way.
Yeah. Because of the Davidic kingship, right? The whole point of the Davidic kingship was the issue. Today's modern version, they call us Zionists. We're Zionists because we believe the Davidic kingship has to come back. It's the exact same belief that we have as them. Hey? So yeah, so it was illegal for them to believe in any other ruler other than Nero, and that, of course, whoever the emperor was at that stage, and that, of course, made it legal and punishable by death to them as well. So they had to be very, very careful. They couldn't, put it as their Facebook status or WhatsApp status because they would get arrested and killed on the spot. Machteld, go ahead. Good evening, Machteld. Hello.
Good evening. I think it was also the start of when you leave behind the practical side of Judaism, then you have to spiritualize everything.
Yeah. That's a massive point you brought up there as well. Yeah, you start doing away with the Sabbath as well, theologically, to make the Bible make sense to you in your situation. And they spiritualized everything, the Sabbath, the temple, the mitzvot, everything. That's a very good point you picked up on there as well. So that was like one of the early signs of, once again, Gnosticism coming in, hey? Remember, with all these Gnostic influences, we've been studying old Simon Magus and the work that he did to spread Gnosticism in Asia Minor. Those guys and those snakes with their teachings would have very easily influenced all of these early Christians who now separated themselves from that. Remember, we spoke about the book of Hebrews last week as well. The fact that Hebrews was written because we could no longer go to the temple. We were excluded from the temple by the Sadducees. And people till today, they misinterpret the book of Hebrews to say, oh, the temple's done away with. We have a spiritual temple. That's not at all what's meant to be there, right? It was a consolation because we still wanted. We were originally a temple sect. That's what we were. So once again, spiritualization of everything. Very well pointed out there, Machteld. Good spot. Gideon, go ahead.
Sid, I'm struggling in my own mind to articulate this. I'm not sure it's going to come out. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But my thinking is that saying about the forest and the trees and distinguishing between a tree and the forest. I kind of think about it in that way, yeah, that okay, you've got the Sabbath, you've got this test, you've got the God-fearers, and it is natural in most of these communities uh, to see that the God-fearers are very close or integrated into Jewish society, into the synagogue, and everything that comes with it, and it makes 100% sense, and it's good. But we are dealing with Gentiles here, and if we look at the actual obligation in terms of, which is interesting how this question is also phrased in terms of observance of the Sabbath, speaking of Gentiles. It feels to me like that's the tree here. That per se is not so much the issue, in the sense that if the Gentiles didn't keep the Shabbat, especially as Jews would keep it. The thing that's actually happening here that's quite interesting is that it's almost like indirectly feeding this monster that eventually resulted in the schism, which that's the larger problem. That's the forest. That's the big deal here, in that it's not the Gentiles not keeping the Shabbat, it is the Gentiles getting separated from the roots, and totally drifting off into Neverland. Okay, that's my idea.
Yeah. No, you articulated pretty well there. Yeah. So, there's that famous saying about Jews and the Sabbath that says, more than the Jews have kept the Sabbath has kept the Jews. Remember that saying? I think it was equally applicable to the early Gentile believers as well. That if they would have been able to keep the Sabbath, they would have stayed closer to Judaism as well. Whereas what we see here in one generation, old Ignatius comes and speaks so badly about the Sabbath just because of that. Because they weren't keeping the Sabbath, it didn't keep their belief, their theology, their practice in the right frame of mind as well. Which we can speak about the mitzvah of keeping Sabbath and how, it's not punishable by death penalty for a Gentile. But look what happens when Gentiles don't keep the Sabbath. That causes the biggest schism, the tree for the forest thing. So it's a very good, analogy for us to look at today when someone asks you about the Sabbath. When Machtel mentioned about the spiritualization of the Sabbath as well, I don't know how many of you have ever heard someone say, "Oh, but because Jesus was nailed to the cross, every day is now a Sabbath." I don't know if you guys have heard that one before. If that's the case, then you might as well be in the parliament because you're never going to work a day in your life. You're not allowed to work. Ridiculous, but once again, yeah. So yeah, the Sabbath would have kept them 100%. Obviously, the mitzvah of idolatry was completely forbidden even for Gentiles according to the Torah. So that one was one that they would have to, without a doubt, give up their life for actually. But the Sabbath one was one they were allowed to actually get away with. But once again, you see what the result is for not keeping the Sabbath. It's just as dire as actually becoming an idolater because it separates you from Hashem. It's amazing actually to see that. Sheva, good evening. Go ahead.
Good evening. I actually read something with one of the posts from First Fruits of Zion, where some of this was sort of actually touched on. And for me, it goes about that for the Jewish people, it's an obligation, whereas for the Christian or the non-Jewish people, it's not an obligation. So there aren't certain rules that you need to follow. And I think that is what is still making a schism today, is because there isn't an alternative. There's nothing that is being said. What is the law according to the Gentiles? You're just told that this is not obligatory, but not what you should be doing. So a lot of the early Gentiles did keep and they looked Jewish from the outside in any case. But I think if, in a sense, they're already, because you are not obligated to do something, it's much easier to say, okay, well, I don't have to do it, so I can step back. And then when you look again, you've been so far removed from where you were that sometimes it's just too difficult to get back. And I think that's what we see today as well. I mean, I know of Christian people that know what we're doing is correct, but to go against tradition and the family and it's just too difficult.
Yeah.
So I think there's so many facets to this. But yeah, the frightening thing, as you said, is that it already started then.
And I think it's an important sociological point as well that what do people do when a part of their religion and their faith becomes an inconvenience to them. When the slightest bit of suffering comes along, people are very easy to throw everything off. For the Jews, we've got an obligation, so we can't throw anything off anyway. We're done for from the get-go. But when you have the choice, then I think, it really shows a person's true colors. Once again, what we spoke about in the video, those ladies that stood up for their Jewish husbands, whereas other people in the world were not standing up. Once again, is that choice. Are you going to stand up and join yourself with the people of Israel, even when the going gets tough? That's something we're going to see a lot of during these wars happening over here as well. So the question remains today, the same thing as well, right? If it will happen to us today, what would we do? Now, unfortunately, back then, very many people stopped their observance of the Sabbath. And of course, we just read there about the fact that you could very easily misquote or misinterpret the sayings of Paul to say, oh, look, the Sabbath is actually done away with, right? It means nothing, actually, etc., etc. The same with the resurrection, right? There's probably where they started figuring out, oh, Yeshua got resurrected on the morning after. So that's Sunday. Okay, let's start doing Sunday then. The Lord's Day, that whole thing. Maybe that's where some of that misinterpretation already started as well with those interpretations. So a lot of things could have been happening sociologically at that stage that, fed into this idea of removal from the Sabbath, unhinging yourself from Jewish things and the Sabbath. So we'll discuss this more when we get to Ignatius's writings maybe a month from now, when we start studying the sayings of Ignatius and some of his anti-Jewish and anti-Sabbath rhetoric that he gets into. Okay, let's continue with our war. Now we're going to the Galilee. All right, the preparations for war in the winter of 66 to 67 Common Era. I'm going to read this section to you guys. The leaders of Jerusalem convened a council in the temple courts. So all of this was going out there in Syria, Damascus, Asia Minor. What's going on in Israel? Okay, so the leaders of Jerusalem convened a council in the temple's courts. Annas, son of Annas, the high priest responsible for the death of James, remember him? That's the guy that threw James off of the pinnacle of the temple. He exerted his power and influence to secure the high priesthood for himself. So he was now in charge, right? Remember, every 5 minutes the high priesthood changed in those days. Here's an important guy. Joseph, the son of Gurion. You've heard of Ben Gurion, right? The airport? No, this guy's the original Ben Gurion. Joseph Ben Gurion, a brother or a relative of Nicodemus. We all know Nicodemus from the Gospels. This was his family member, maybe his brother, maybe a nephew, maybe a cousin, but it was definitely his family member. We're going to encounter him a bit later when we study the fall of Jerusalem as well. He worked closely with this high priest Annas ben Annas, and together the two powerful men took charge over the city's affairs. Their first task was to complete the city walls that King Agrippa had left unfinished in order to prepare themselves to defend the city. And the Talmud says that the three wealthiest men of Jerusalem personally financed preparations to withstand a siege of Jerusalem. So they saw trouble coming. I don't know, maybe Nicodemus had a word with him about the warnings of Yeshua about them coming. And the three wealthiest men in Jerusalem said, don't worry, we'll build the walls and we'll build up enough storage houses to survive for a very long time, to the point where Rome will run out of money. Listen to this. This is what it says in the Talmud. Tractate Gittin 56a. It says, there were three men of great wealth residing in Jerusalem. Elon Musk? No, he wasn't one of them. Okay, who were the three richest men in Jerusalem? One of them was Nicodemus. Our very Nicodemus. Nicodemus ben Gurion, ben Kalba Shavua, and Ben Tzitzit HaKeset. Ben Tzitzit HaKeset we spoke about not long ago here in the shul. He's the guy that was so rich. He had his extra long tzitzits, and he would have servants walking next to him with pillows on the floor, so that his tzitzits never touched the floor, even though they were so long. This is how rich this guy was. Okay, so these were the three richest guys in Jerusalem. One of these said to the people of Jerusalem, I will keep them in wheat and barley. He said, I will sponsor wheat and barley for the siege. We'll have enough wheat and barley inside the city of Jerusalem so that they can try to attack us for years on end, and we'll have enough wheat and barley to make ourselves lekker challah and bribery cheese. Okay. The second rich man said, I will keep them in wine, oil, and salt. He said, we're going to have enough lachayems for, I don't know how many years, I think it says here at the bottom how many years, 21 years. We've got enough wine, oil, and salt to last us for 21 years while they try and take our city. The third rich person said, I will keep them in wood, so we can start a fire. The rabbis considered the offer of wood the most generous. Why? Because we could also use it to keep the fire going in the temple. For Rabbi Chizda used to say, one storehouse of wheat requires 60 storehouses of wood or fuel. It's 60 times as important as wheat. Those men were wealthy enough to sustain the city of Jerusalem for 21 years. Ah! Take that, Rome, trying to destroy our city. We can survive for 21 years and live happily ever after inside our walls without worrying about you. What year was this? This was 66 to 67 Common Era, and the temple was destroyed only 3 years later. We had enough supplies to last us for 21 years, but because of our greed, infighting, and baseless hatred, it was all destroyed. We're going to study about that next week, how it was destroyed because of our baseless hatred for our fellow Jews. Okay, now, while we were preparing for the siege, they appointed, this is now old, the brother of Nicodemus, Joseph ben Gurion, and Anas ben Anas, they appointed a talented young priest by the name of Yosef ben Matityahu, who we now know as Josephus, the writer himself. He was actually a warlord, so to speak, to take up charge over both the upper Galilee and the lower Galilee. Josephus began his preparations for war by establishing an administration over the Galilee. So that was why Josephus knows so much about this war, because he was the one fighting against Vespasian. Okay, so here the war begins. So they told Josephus, you're going to be our first port of call to fight the war against the Romans when they start invading. Okay, so in the spring of 67 Common Era, Vespasian arrives. Okay, news of the revolt and the defeat of the 12th Legion finally arrived in Rome, so Nero knew that he had to fight back. So Nero appointed Vespasian as head of the legions in Syria. The new commander arrived in Antioch, and he found King Agrippa II. Remember last week we studied about him trying to trying to calm the masses, and tell them, oh no, you must listen to this Syrian proconsul. Don't worry about him. We'll sort him out. And people started pelting him with stones, and he ran away. Him and Bernice. Okay, so he found King Agrippa II already awaiting his arrival with his whole army. Agrippa pledged his loyalty not to the Jews, but to Vespasian and Rome. So Agrippa actually joined with Vespasian as he came down at the command of Emperor Nero. Big problem, ne? He was pretty much a fence jumper. Agrippa always sat on the fence between the Jews and the Romans, looking after himself only. So in the spring of 67 Common Era, Vespasian set out for the Galilee at the head of the 15th Legion. They marched south to Acco, or otherwise known as Ptolemy, and his son, Titus, who's also going to be important in the coming weeks, he's of course the one that ends up destroying the temple. His son Titus arrived from Alexandria in Egypt with the 5th and the 10th legions. Josephus actually says that the whole army ended up numbering about 60,000 Roman soldiers that they brought to come and destroy the Galilee and eventually Jerusalem as well. All right, so as they started entering the Galilee, they went to the city of Sepphoris, and Sepphoris actually surrendered immediately. They didn't want to fight. Okay, they said, no, we're Jews, we study the Bible, we don't know how to fight, so you can have our city. Josephus responded to the surrender. Remember, Josephus is now trying to defend the Jews. He wasn't on the Roman side just yet. Josephus responded to that surrender of Sepphoris by leading his army in an attempt to recapture the city of Sepphoris. I'm going to show you guys a map in a minute to show you where all these cities are in the Galilee. But the Roman forces repelled the attempt and forced the rebel army to retreat. Then the Romans retaliated against those rebels by ravaging the surrounding countryside. This is what Josephus says. He says, Galilee from end to end became a scene of fire and blood. The Roman raiding parties may have pillaged the nearby village of Nazareth as well at that time. Okay, here comes a big battle in the city. It says here Yodfat. Other times we pronounce it as Jodafata. So in the city of Yodafata, there was a big battle that occurred as well. All right, so I'm going to go into the questions, and then we'll get into the map and all of Vespasian's attacks in the different cities. Okay, so question number 1 is distinguish between Joseph ben Matityahu, or Josephus, and Vespasian. So Josephus was the general over the rebel forces up in the Galilee. Vespasian was the general over the Roman army in the war. Now, he's very important because later on, Vespasian eventually does become the emperor. So he's not the one that ends up destroying the temple. He gets called back to Rome because he becomes the emperor, but his son Titus is the one that destroys the temple. Now, Vespasian himself is the complete opposite of Nero, right? Vespasian is like a war general, very forward and strict, and he's that kind of guy. Whereas Nero, he was just like a playboy that ended up getting power at an age too young and followed every vice under the sun. Vespasian was much more orderly as well. So Vespasian was the one who was running the show over here in the attack on Galilee and Jerusalem. Okay, what and where was Jotapata? It was a Jewish city in the Galilee near Nazareth. Now, the thing about Jotapata, which makes it such a good place to actually defend, is the fact that the city itself was actually surrounded. There were 3 valleys on the side of the city and only one entrance to the north. So those 3 sides were pretty much protected by themselves. You can just, stand up there and use a pea shooter to shoot people coming at you. There was only one place where people could attack from. That's from the north. So we're going to show it to you guys in a minute as well. And then the third question is very interesting. What are the Desposini? It's not Despacito. Don't confuse it with that song. What are the Desposini? The Desposini was the name that we gave to the relatives of Yeshua. So we still had, of course, okay, so James has now been killed already by this very priest we just read about there, Anas ben Anas. So James has been killed, but there were many other members of Yeshua's family still alive. So, of course, his uncle, old Simon, son of Clopas, was now the leader of the Messianic believers at this stage. But he also had other cousins and aunts and uncles and extended family. These guys that were actual literal family of Yeshua, because remember the whole point why we appointed Simon Clopas as our new leader was because James had passed away and James was from the family of Yeshua. We wanted to keep the Davidic line of Yeshua and his family alive and intact as our leadership, so we called them all the Desposini. Now the Desposini, Yeshua's relatives, they all, majority of them, lived in a city called Kochaba. Kochaba is right next to Jotapata. So when the Romans came to attack that area, everyone from that city of Kochaba would have ran into Jotapata to try and hide out there and survive the siege. So very, very likely, majority of Yeshua's family, if they weren't in Pella already, they would have probably went up here to Jotapata. Okay, so for our group discussion, we're going to get out the maps and try and find and identify these locations where the Jewish believers lived and compare their locations. So let me share with you guys the map for tonight, and we'll look at some of the spaces and places and see if we can spot all of them. Okie dokie. So, remember old Vespasian? He came from Syrian Antioch. So he came from up here, came down the coastline, and eventually stopped here in Akko. And then his son, Titus, he was down in Alexandria, Egypt. So he would have come up here through Gaza and eventually joined him over here in Akko as well. And then from here, they decided to enter into Galilee to attack these cities. So first of all, here's Sepphoris down here. Right, so Sepphoris was the first one to go and surrender to Vespasian and said, "Oh, please don't kill us. You can have our city. It's fine." By the way, just so you know, here is the Sea of Galilee. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Galilee, right. So there's Sepphoris. Right. Then after he went there to Sepphoris, he would have gone up here and maybe even started with, where's that place gone now? There, Garaba. That place goes by a new name. It could be Gabera, Gabara, or Garaba. So that city would have attacked first. Here is Jotapata. That's the big city where everyone would have, in this area, would have flocked to come and hide out. There's Kochaba. That's where Yeshua's relatives, the Desposini, many of them lived there in Kochaba. Of course, Nazareth was down there as well. There's Nazareth. So when he came to this forest, maybe Nazareth themselves would have surrendered as well. Who knows? Here's the city of Cana, where Yeshua, of course, turned the water to wine, and the Apostle Bartholomew comes from there, of course, as well. And here's another city called Sagona. Another name for Sagona is Sakanya. So you might remember we've once upon a time studied something from the Talmud about where it talks about a Christian believer by the name of Jacob of Kfar Sakanya. That's where he comes from. He was one of Yeshua's disciples. It might be James the Lesser, one of Yeshua's 12 apostles, that's mentioned in the Talmud, where he was defending one of the teachings of Yeshua about the Sabbath. And I think it was about the Sabbath as well. Okay, so this is the area where they were coming and now fighting. Okay, so they had to come to Jotapata from the north to come in there to try and defeat it. Later on, we're going to read a little bit about Tiberius as well. Tiberius also just surrendered. They just gave up the entire city, and all the rebels that were there fled up north, and they came here to the city of Magdala. There's Magdala there, just a little bit north on the Sea of Galilee. So there was another battle that happened there at Magdala that we're going to talk about. And then also, if we go up north to the right here, you're going to see Gamala. We're going to study Gamala tonight as well over here in the Golan. These are the Golan Heights over here. So Vespasian also came over here. After they defeated Jotapata, I think it is, he went and took, or maybe even after they took Magdala, he took like a 21-day break and he let all his guys rest. So, of course, King Agrippa allowed him to come down here to Caesarea to come and chill there by the sea, a little holiday by the sea during the middle of the war. But also, majority of his legion he sent up north here, just north of the troubled area of Dan, to the other Caesarea called Caesarea Philippi. So they went and chilled there for 21 days, and from there they probably came down here to come and do the battles here with Sagona and Gamala, which we're going to study a little bit later tonight as well. So you guys see, you familiarize yourself now with the area of the Galilee. This is what we're going to study now, this battle that happened over here and how they came and battled over here. First to Jotapata, and then went inland over there to Tiberias and Magdala, and then eventually came down and fought here in Gamala as well. Okay, good. Consider yourself now educated. All right, let me put up the booklet again and we'll continue with the booklet. We're doing a bit of history and geography today. Okay, so the siege of Jotapata. Okay, so if you guys do want to, by the way, for those of you that have the booklets to read about everything that happened, it is spelled out for you over here. This whole section of this page over here tells you a little bit about the cities as well, but I explained most of it over there as well. So if you guys do want to go recap the whole fight and where they went first, etc., go read that page. All right, so the siege of Jotapata happened in the month of Iyar up till Tammuz. This time of the year, by the way, the time of the year we're in right now, in the year 67 Common Era, 3 years before the fall of the temple in Jerusalem. All right, so while they were sieging Jotapata, the Jewish defenders of the city conducted daily hit-and-run attacks on the Roman forces. They were fighting back against these Romans. Vespasian responded by ordering the construction of a massive siege ramp to help them get over the wall into the city. Because, like I said earlier, there were those valleys around the city, but then there was one wall that old Josephus built up to help protect the city of Jotapata. So he decided to build this massive siege ramp, just like, you know, the story of old Masada. Those of you that have gone on a tour to Masada might remember they told us as well about the ramp that they built to try and get up onto Masada as well. So same thing. This is one of the things they like to build. They like to build ramps, these Romans. Okay. Now, the problem was that inside the city of Jotapata, they were starting to run out of water. They didn't have any natural springs like any of the other cities, like Sogana or any of the other ones there around the Galilee. So they had a bit of a problem there. Now, eventually, the Romans completed this ramp, and Vespasian brought forward a massive battering ram. Its iron head was shaped like the head of an actual ram, enclosed to protect the operators from any arrows that were being shot their way. Its initial blow shook the city walls, eliciting desperate cries from the residents. Josephus tried countering this by hanging chaff-filled sacks to soften the impact of the battering ram, but the Romans quickly removed these defenses as well. So poor old Josephus, he was trying his best to try and do anything to stop this battering ram from destroying this wall that he just built up in order to protect the city. In desperation, check this out, it's pretty cool. In desperation, defenders launched an aggressive attack against the battering ram, successfully breaking off its iron head. They broke off the ram head of the battering ram. That's why it's called battering ram, right? Because the ram head. So well done to them for doing that. But it didn't save them very long, because before dawn, the ram ended up breaching the walls. And Vespasian planned a morning assault on the city. Now, Josephus's men, they crouched under their shields until the terrible precipitation stopped. Then they leaped forward, sallying out through the breach in the wall to intercept these besiegers. At the same time, the attackers raised ladders against the walls of Jotapata, and soldiers began ascending these ladders to get over the wall. As the Romans pressed in around the walls, the defenders, while they were on top of the walls, poured out scalding oil that ran under the armor of the soldiers, blistering their flesh. So they were cooking up oil on top of the wall there, waiting for these Roman soldiers to start climbing the ladders up there. Who knows? Maybe it was the leftover oil from Hanukkah. Maybe it was the leftover oil from the latkes they made for breakfast that morning, and they poured it down on these Roman soldiers. You can just imagine going in between their armor and burning and scalding their flesh. The Jewish defenders fought boldly, continually repulsing the attackers. By nightfall, Vespasian actually called off the assault against the city of Jotapata. Now, frustrated by his failure, Vespasian decided to build the ramp even higher and to erect 3 50-foot towers on the banks in which he could station archers above the wall line to see what's going on inside and stop the locals from walking on the top of the walls. For his part, Josephus attempted actually to leave the city. Josephus tried to leave the city, telling his men that he would go and seek reinforcements. But they knew better. They knew what Josephus was doing. They realized their general only hoped to escape with his life, so they actually refused to let Josephus leave. How's that? He was trying to run for the hills. He was a coward. That's what was going on. The general was trying to abandon his men and run for his life. All right, now on the first day of Tammuz, late July, on the 47th day since the siege began, a heavy morning fog, like we have here in Pretoria at the moment, cloaked the entire city. In utter silence, the Roman army crept over the wall undetected. Vespasian's son Titus led the assault. They found the sentries fast asleep and cut their throats. The defenders awoke to find the city had already been taken. So on the first day, they killed all those that they discovered in the open. The next day, they began the laborious task of searching out the cellars, the cisterns, and the caves, and the secret hiding places. Josephus numbered the dead at 40,000 people in the city of Jotapata. How many of the disciples of Yeshua and the extended family of Yeshua, the Desposini, might have fallen in the siege of Jotapata? More than a few must have been swept up in the carnage of the city. So that also contributed a lot to the formation of our early believers as well. The fact that we lost so many of Yeshua's family during their time. You can only imagine what was going on in the mind of old Simon, son of Clopas, whose job it was to lead our community at the stage, to hear about all his family members being slaughtered in the city of Jotapata. Okay, so that's the first place where we see this happening. Now, what happened to Josephus while he was in the city? He decided to make a suicide pact. Actually, he didn't decide. The guys decided it, and he didn't like it. Suicide on prophecy on the 4th of Tammuz, 67 Common Era. It's actually amazing that we've got Josephus's writings to tell us about everything that happened in this war that we can study until this very day. So that's focus section number 4. So here it goes. When the Romans entered the city, Josephus and 40 others hid themselves in an underground den. It sounds like old Ali Baba and his 40 thieves. But anyway, on the third day, the Romans discovered the hiding spot. The men hiding below insisted that the only honorable thing to do, now that the Romans had discovered them, was to commit suicide instead of letting the Romans kill them. It's the same story as Masada, hey, for those of you that have studied the story of Masada. Josephus argued for surrender, though. He didn't want to kill himself. He considered himself gifted with prophecy, and he conveniently prophesied and foresaw himself being taken alive by the Romans. He's like, guys, I had a vision from Hashem in my sleep that I would survive this. So I'm not going to kill myself because I had a vision. Very clever, hey? Sneaky. I know many prophets today that are wandering around in Christianity doing the same thing as well for their own gain and success. Okay. He claims to have offered a long, eloquent speech about the value of life and the wickedness of suicide. So that's a good point, actually. You know, when we take these tours to Masada and Israel, the question is always raised: did they do the right thing by committing suicide instead of letting the Romans take them, or is it a sin in the Torah? Can you take your own life if someone is threatening your life like that? And it's a big discussion amongst the rabbis. The answer, of course, is no, you can never commit suicide. But anyway, so Josephus has this long exposition as to why you shouldn't have done it. It's very interesting. You can actually access it till this very day and read it online. I think that's a good discussion for today. So if you guys do want the link to read about that, you're welcome to spend some time doing that. In any case, his companions were not convinced by his argument. If he would not kill himself, they said, well, we'll offer to do it for you. Reluctantly, Josephus agreed to a suicide pact. So 2 by 2, these 14 men cast lots to see who would commit suicide first. The man with the first lot bared his throat, and the man with the second lot used his blade as if he was slaughtering an animal. Josephus apparently manipulated the lots until only he and one man remained alive. He cryptically hints at the saying, we cannot say whether it happened so by chance or whether it was the providence of God. This is what Josephus says about how the fact that he survived to the end, him and this last guy. Scullum. Anyway, surrounded by the corpses of the others, Josephus ended up persuading the last guy that was with him to join him in surrendering to the Romans rather than killing themselves. He said, someone has to tell the story of Jotapata, so we might as well just surrender instead of killing ourselves. The soldiers then led the captive Jewish general back to their general, to Vespasian. And when Josephus got to Vespasian, he got that slick tongue of his working again, trying to save himself. Okay, so question number 1. How did Josephus escape the suicide pact that he made with the other defenders of Jotapata? He manipulated the lots. I saw in the news this morning something's happening with some ANC minister and corruption in our national lottery. Same thing happened back then. Nothing new under the sun. Josephus did the same thing. Question number 2. What prophecy did Josephus give to Vespasian? So when they eventually brought Josephus before Vespasian, he said to Vespasian, please spare my life because I'm not just a normal man. I'm in fact a prophet. And I've had a prophecy about you, Vespasian. I've had a prophecy that Nero is going to die and you will be emperor. And then he said, oh, I'm a prophet, find out about, I even prophesied about the fall of Jotapata by your hand. And Vespasian said, all right, fine, I'm going to send some of my legions to go question and interrogate some of the people that we captured as prisoners to find out if you actually did make this prophecy before I came to the city. And these guys actually said, yes, Josephus did prophesy this. I don't know if he put them up to it or if he did prophesy it or what's going on here. They just thought, okay, well, maybe this is our chance to survive. Anyway, so he decided not to kill Josephus on the spot and decided to keep Josephus. What job did the Romans give to Josephus? The advisor, they gave him the job of an advisor to the general, a translator, and a liaison, a very well-spoken young man. And Titus might have liked him because he was similar of age. Your opponent, sometimes you can show respect for your opponent and the fact that he put up a good fight against you. So they decided to keep him alive. And that's why till today in Judaism, Josephus is considered and remembered as a traitor. Right? He was supposed to help us defend Jerusalem against the Romans, but he ended up jumping ship and joining them and becoming a writer for the emperors and for old Vespasian himself. Okay, so the group discussion, we're not going to do it, but it says here, see if you can find the full text of Josephus' speech against suicide, which is available online, and read it and discuss it. We're not going to discuss it. If you guys wanted to discuss it, ask me. I'll send you a link to it. Or you can just Google it online. He's a speech, Josephus' speech against suicide. There's many versions of it online where you can actually read about his arguments about it as well. And talk about that. Maybe we'll discuss that one day when we discuss the 10 Commandments again about murder. So yeah, interesting that he's got his whole speech about it. Just so he can save his own bacon. Okay. Now, focus section number 5. Falling in love in the month of Av. There we go. By the way, we have like a minor festival in the month of Av called Tu B'Av. On Tu B'Av, that's Jewish Valentine's Day. The 15th of Av is like our Jewish Valentine's Day. It's a day that back in the days of the prophets, everyone who was unmarried the ladies would go into the fields, into the vineyards, dressed in white, and the men would come down and propose and find themselves a wife on that day. So it was like a massive proposal day, I guess, matchmaking day in Israel. The Talmud actually says it's the 2 most joyous days in all of Jewish history is Yom Kippur and Tu B'Av. Tu B'Av you can understand because it's the day you got the marriages. But then we'd say Yom Kippur. And why is joyous? Because you get clean, you get cleansed, you get atoned for on Yom Kippur. But interesting that they mentioned that is also one of the happiest days for all of Israel. Okay, anyway, so somebody fell in love in the month of Av. So Vespasian ordered the city of Jotapata to be demolished. Then the legions marched up to Caesarea, to the west, to Caesarea Maritima, Caesarea on the sea. So they marched there to old King Agrippa. Now, King Agrippa and Queen Bernice also opened their lavish palace up in Caesarea Philippi, up north in Galilee, just there by the city of Dan, above the city of Dan as well. they felt sorry, where am I now? Here we go. To provide hospitality for Vespasian, his son Titus, and their officers. For 20 days, the king and queen, Agrippa and Bernice, the Jewish king and queen, wined and dined the battle-hardened general and his officers in proper Roman style. Okay, now King Agrippa II, he was hoping, the reason why I did this was he was hoping to enlist Vespasian's help in bringing his territory back under control. The Jewish rebels had taken several of his cities, including the important city of Tiberias, which used to be under his control, and on the shores of the Lake of Galilee, and the strategic city of Gamala in the Golan Heights as well. So he wanted Vespasian to help him out to take back those two cities. So Vespasian's son, while they were being wined and dined there, his son Titus fell under the spell of Bernice's legendary beauty. We've spoken about Bernice's legendary beauty in the past before. She, at this stage, was nearly 40 years old, and he was a young buck at the age of 26. She was Jewish royalty. His family was not aristocratic. She was sophisticated and conducted herself with a majestic bearing. He was a soldier. She exuded an attractive Jewish wholesomeness. He was accustomed only to sexual debauchery and Neronian Rome. And he fell in love with this angel that was before his eyes. Jewish angel, by the way. Now, the queen herself had never considered the possibility of marriage to a non-Jew. In fact, her previous marriage, remember, was, what was the guy's name? I forgot his name. But he had to actually convert to Judaism in order to marry her, right? Nor had she ever expressed interest in anyone below the station of monarch. But the attention of the handsome young war hero actually flattered her. She quickly warmed to the idea of a relationship, and she returned the young soldier's amorous signals as well. Young love. Not that she was young, eh? Okay. So question number one. Well, in the world we live today, I think it's called cradle snatching, eh? Where a 40-year-old takes a 26-year-old. Cougar, I think, is the term they use nowadays. Okay. Distinguish between Caesarea Maritima and Caesarea Philippi. So Caesarea Maritima, right, maritime, tells you about the sea, right, is Herod's harbor city on the Mediterranean coast, there where they kept Paul prisoner. Capital of the province where his palace sat. Now, Caesarea Philippi is in the Golan near Mount Hermon up north. So they had both of these places. First they went to Maritima, and then they got up to Philippi as well. Okay, question number two is, who is Titus? He is, of course, the son of Vespasian. Eventually, he's the one that does destroy the temple as well. Question number three, and I love the story of how Titus dies as well. We're going to study that, how a chocha, got stuck in his nose and caused him this everlasting pain. He couldn't take it anymore. We'll talk about that story when we get there. Question number three. To whom did the Galilean cities of Tiberias and Gamala belong before the revolt? They used to belong to King Herod Agrippa II, and the rebels took it from him, so he wanted those cities back, and that's why he wanted Vespasian's help to get those cities back. Now, here's an interesting question. Aside from the age difference between Titus, who was 26, and Bernice, who was 40, what are some other reasons that a relationship between them should have been deemed inappropriate? What do you guys think? You're welcome to share your thoughts here. It's quite a funny question to ask, actually. Sheva, are you looking for a young buck? I'm checking you.
It does happen now in our family quite regularly, so I'm not going to comment too much on the age gap differences. But it does, it has its problems. Ek gaan nie verder uitbrei nie.
Yeah,
Die skeletons uit die
The skeletons in the closet will make us impure. Any thoughts about specifically Bernice and Titus, why they would have been a bad match?
Absolutely, because I mean the one was Jewish, the other was Gentile, just as a starting point, and the one was Roman, the head of the Romans, and the other one was supposedly the head of the Jewish people in Israel. So they should have been in total conflict, and yet, as you said earlier, I mean, Agrippa kept on jumping ship. He went where he seemed to, well, where he thought he was going to get his own interest looked after. So, yeah, definitely, I think that that is quite obvious to me.
Yeah, at the wedding, the priest would have said, join them in unholy matrimony, because that is a really unholy mix. A Roman war general like Titus, who was just like Nero and enjoyed all the devices and all the vices of Nero, marrying Bernice, who, we spoke about her last week. She's this weird individual in Jewish history that, she loved her Judaism, but at the same time, she was a corrupt Herodian as well. So yeah, weird match. So yeah, 100%. Eventually, later on, this does become a problem when Nero does bring her back. Not Nero, Titus does bring her back to Rome, and he wants to marry her. All of the people in Rome shout against this. Why? Because she's Jewish. They had that anti-Semitic demon in them. They didn't want him to get married to Bernice simply because she was Jewish, and he had to call off the wedding completely and leave her by the side. So we'll get to that story as well after when we get to old Titus bringing back the menorah back to Rome as well, and we're studying that. So yeah, that was it was doomed to fail from the start. But love is blind, they say, eh? Makes fools out of many people, which is why you got to be careful. Don't look at it that way. If you want to learn about love, look at the story of what's his name, Isaac and Rebecca. There you go. Those stories. Those are how you're supposed to measure love. Okay, focus section number 6. How can you have a love story in between the fall of Jerusalem, eh? Oh, these people. Okay, focus section number 6. Tiberius and Magdala. All right, so this is in the month of Elul. The king is in the field. Unfortunately, over here, the Romans were too. In the year 67 Common Era, preparations for the high holidays and Sukkot. Right, so at this point, Vespasian sent a detachment of horsemen to offer the people of Tiberias terms of peace, because Herod Agrippa II, told him, listen, these guys used to be under my control. Don't worry, we can make peace with them. So he sent the dispatchment of horsemen to offer peace unto the Tiberians, but the Jewish zealots in Tiberias, they had taken control of the city, and they attacked these messengers and even captured a few of those Roman horses. Now, the elders of the city, who didn't like these zealots who took their city, and several prominent magistrates fled out to the Roman camp and prostrated themselves before Vespasian and King Agrippa, begging the general to spare the city and its citizens, explaining that they did not follow these zealots that took their city. So the rebel forces in Tiberias saw these guys escape and go ask Vespasian to spare the city and the people, and rather that they would turn against the zealots. Once the rebels realized that this had happened, they fled from the city of Tiberias and took refuge within the walls of nearby Magdala. The Greek name for Magdala, of course, is that one, Tarakeia. What does Magdala mean? Migdal. We say Migdal means a tower. Hey, Migdala. That we sing it here every Shabbos, so every time after you have your blessings. Hey, Tower of Salvations of his king. The word Migdal is the word over there for tower. So that's Magdala. So Tiberias ended up opening its gates to Vespasian's army without any battle. As a favor to King Agrippa, Vespasian ordered his troops not to rape and pillage the city. He only tore down a section of the wall to allow his army to better gain access in and out of the city and return the control of the city to the government of King Agrippa. Agrippa got what he wanted. He got his city of Tiberias back. Vespasian turned his attention to the nearby city of Magdala. You guys know the name Magdala, of course, because of Miriam of Magdala. So, the rebels fell back to the city walls and rushed into Magdala, but the townsfolk of Magdala tried to repulse them. No one liked these zealots. The citizens of Magdala had entered the war reluctantly, and now that the army was beaten, they had no desire to die for the cause, along with the zealots who had overrun their city. As Titus and his men drew up close to the city walls, they could hear the shouts of the conflict inside the city. Encouraged by the enemy's discomfiture, Titus mounted his horse and led another charge at the city of Magdala, this time skirting around the city and riding into the water of the Sea of Galilee. Then coming up into Magdala from the beach. Hey, you remember that Baywatch intro you used to watch with the people running slowly? So this is all Titus running into the city of Magdala on his horse. Reminds me of all the Volrod Voltamara. Except this guy's trying to attack the city and kill everyone. He and his 600 horsemen entered the city from the sea. That's quite an ominous sign, eh? Seahorses. All right. A great number managed to escape this attack in fishing boats and small sailing vessels that they had prepared. So these zealots ran for it by taking a boat and speeding out of there. But Vespasian loaded the rafts with men and sent them out to engage the rebels in the boats. A great naval battle ensued on the lake, on the Sea of Galilee. The very waters that Yeshua calmed during the storm, that Yeshua himself even walked on, that became now a battleground, so to speak, for this naval battle between Vespasian and Titus's men and the zealots and some of the innocents that were trying to escape from the city of Magdala. Like a pirate battle, hey? Josephus recalled one could see the lake all bloody and full of corpses, for not one man escaped. A terrible stench rose, and there was a tragic sight in that land over the following days. Shipwrecks and corpses littered the whole shore. The dead bodies swelled and rotted in the sun. This is where Yeshua spent his days preaching repentance so that this day wouldn't come, and the people didn't listen. Okay, question number 1. What famous Bible character apparently came from the city of Magdala? Mary of Magdalene. Her surname is not Magdalene. It just means Mary of Magdala, from this city. Question number 2. How did the Romans conquer Tiberias? Tiberias, I don't know if you've been to Tiberias. Many of you guys, I think, have been to Tiberias. It's quite a cool city nowadays. The city itself surrendered when the rebels fled. Question number 3. Where was the final battle of Magdala fought? On the surface of the Sea of Galilee. Okay, so group discussion. They want us to do some archaeological digging. The remains of the city of Magdala have recently undergone some excavation, revealing a first century synagogue. So they actually found the synagogue of Magdala, and the site now has an impressive visitor center till this very day. They want us to make a virtual visit to the first century Magdala at the website magdala.org. We're not going to do that. I'm going to leave that for you guys to do at home. Type in after this lesson, magdala.org, and you can actually like walk through. You can click through the whole visitor center and go look at the old synagogue that's there. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share for you guys a video that we have from the Higher Sword course. Back in the Higher Sword course, there was a small portion where Boaz and Daniel Lancaster actually went to the city of Magdala. So give me a second. I'm going to play that for you guys, just so you can see what the synagogue looked like. And that is the synagogue where Yeshua, very likely, I'm almost 100% sure, he would have preached in that very synagogue in the city of Magdala. Remember, Magdala, one of the things Magdala was known for was the fact that that was where they salted and preserved fish. Bokkums come from Magdala, right? Israeli bokkums. When Yeshua multiplied the dry fish and the bread, that fish came from Magdala. So Yeshua himself would have probably been in this very synagogue you're going to see now in this video, and many of his disciples would have been from there as well. So let me play a short video just so you can see a little quick view of the city of Magdala.
The city of Magdala on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee is presumably the original hometown of Mary Magdalene, a name which probably just means Mary from Magdala. It was also known for its dried fish industry. Galilean fishermen brought their fish to market here. In 2009, a construction crew accidentally uncovered the remains of a first-century synagogue, and since then, archaeologists have found more of the city from the days of Yeshua, including a well-preserved ritual immersion pool called a mikveh. There's little doubt that Yeshua's disciples brought fish to market on the docks of Magdala, or that Yeshua taught in the Magdala synagogue. It's also possible that it was here that he first encountered the woman who would become his disciple, Mary from Magdala. The Gospels say that Yeshua cast out 7 demons from Mary Magdala. That could have happened here in this synagogue or in this neighborhood. For sure, they would have been talking about it in this synagogue the next Sabbath.
Yeah, you bet.
Right, so there you guys got a little view of the ancient city of Magdala that they've unearthed. You can still go visit till this day in the synagogue itself. In the middle of the synagogue, there's this weird stone that they found. People are speculating whether that was like the beamer that they used to read the Torah from. It's really cool. So go online, check that magdala.org website, and you can browse around and check out the city. I think it was 2009 that they discovered it for the first time. And I don't know how many of you ever had a chance to actually go and visit the actual place. But there it is. You can go into a synagogue, a first century synagogue, where almost 100% 100% Yeshua himself would have walked. You can go walk into that synagogue yourself today. How cool is that? Yeah, it's pretty cool. Anyway, now, like I said, that's the city where they made bokoms. So that mikvah must have been a very stinky mikvah, if you can think about that. But anyway, let's get back to us sharing our booklet and continue to see what old Vespasian did with the people that he captured in Magdala. Here we go. All right. Slaves to the market. That's what he did with the people. After the battle, Vespasian set up his tribunal in Magdala to sort the surviving rebels who had come from other parts of Galilee from the citizens of Magdala. He wanted to spare the citizens because he knew that they weren't part of the rebels. Vespasian marched the whole population into the stadium in Tiberias. He commanded his men to kill all the old and any others that he deemed useless. Reminds us of when we climbed off the trains at Auschwitz, same thing happened to us there, right? He sent the strongest of the young men as slaves to Corinth, where Nero was attempting to dig a canal through the isthmus. So today we actually have the canal, the Corinth Canal that goes through there, where you get these massive ships fitting through this tiny little canal there by Corinth to get through. But so Nero was the first one to try this, and he did a lot of work there, but he never completed it. And I think in the 1800s, they eventually decided to finish digging this canal and make it a trade route for today. Anyway, so most of the slaves went there. The rest, a vast multitude, went to the regular slave market as well. So that was the end of the city of Gamala. Jotapata, Tiberias, and Gamala. Okay. Not Gamala, and Magdala. Now we're going to learn about Gamala. Rosh Hashanah, the year 67, Common Era. This is the time when we're supposed to be blowing the trumpets to repent, and the trumpets were being blown for war as well in the year 67 Common Era. I think many of us believe that Yeshua's return is probably going to be around about the high holidays. So everything that's happening over here in 67 Common Era is most likely going to happen again when Yeshua does return. So, it's interesting to study this and realize what we have to prepare ourselves for if it does happen to us in our day and age as well. So Vespasian moved these troops up to Gamala, a Jewish city that had been a hotbed of revolutionary zealot action for most of this century. Gamala sat on top of a steep hill in the southern end of the Golan Heights. The hill resembles the hump of a camel's back. That's why it's called Gamala. In Hebrew, Gamal is a camel. Of course, in Aramaic, Gamala is the word for it as well. Okay, now Josephus explains the city. Josephus says the houses are built thick and close to one another. The city hangs so strangely that it looks as if it would collapse on itself. So steep is the slope at the top. I think last year or 2 years ago when we were studying the Gospels, we actually had a look at the map of Gamala and some photos of the city of Gamala and how it looks. It's kind of like a camel's hump, but it's more like a chameleon, if you ask me. It's got this really sharp incline, which is important to understand. Most of the master's disciples grew up under the shadow of Gamala as well. Right, so let's talk a little bit about the attack on the city of Gamala. Where was Gamala located and what does Gamala mean? We said it's at the top of the steep hill on the southern end of the Golan, and it means camel. Question number 2, from which nearby villages did several of the master's disciples come? So close to Gamala, in the shadow of the hill of Gamala, is the city of Capernaum. Capernaum we know very well. You can even go there today as well. There's also a first century synagogue. There's a later century synagogue unearthed, but underneath it you can find this black stone section, which is actually a first century synagogue as well in Capernaum, where Yeshua 100% would have been. They even found the mezuzah. That was a stone mezuzah that was in the wall of that synagogue, which you can still see on display in Capernaum till this day. So I have a suspicion that Yeshua would have touched that mezuzah, and you can actually go and touch it till this very day in the excavations at Capernaum. That would be pretty cool. I know that you've got many Catholics that go and follow places where they say the footstep of Yeshua is, and they put their hand in it as if they touched the Messiah. Here's a place that's actually legit, where you can say Yeshua would have touched the mezuzah of the synagogue in Capernaum. And of course, Bethsaida. Most of his disciples come there from Bethsaida as well. So that was all here in the valley, just underneath Gamala. So these towns would have probably been attacked by these Romans as well. Question number 3. What happened to King Agrippa II when he attempted to address the people of Gamala? So he thought, let me go and speak to them. Once upon a time, I used to own this place along with Tiberius. And look how well Tiberius worked out. Maybe I can offer peace into these guys as well. He started speaking to them and they started throwing rocks at him, like they did just recently in Jerusalem. And they actually injured him. They threw him in the elbow and injured his elbow. So poor old Agrippa II left there with tennis elbow. Right, no love. Just game, set, and match. Okay. Group discussion. Gamala is called the Masada of the North. I don't think we can discuss this, but anyway. If you know the story of Masada, compare it with the fall of Gamala below. I don't think we have to do that. We're going to read it for ourselves because we've got the section here. And it's important to get the history since we're studying all the build up till the destruction of the temple. So the fall of Gamala happened on Sukkot 67 Common Era. So that was their high holidays. That was Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Sukkot. Fighting a war with the Romans surrounding your city about to kill you. You had the upper hand, so you could blow the shofar every morning, and build up the excitement and the encouragement for the people inside the city of Gambala, saying, don't worry, we've got the high ground, we've got Hashem on our side, we'll blow the shofar every single morning. But eventually the city did fall. Why? Because they didn't listen to the sound of the shofar to cause repentance. They just did it because they wanted to fight against the Romans. It's unfortunate, but that's what it was. Remember the story we sometimes tell on Sukkot about the guys that pelted the Sadducean Cohen with their etrogs because he didn't follow the Pharisaic understanding of doing the water libation on Sukkot? Well, yeah, they pelted old King Herod with rocks. Same story. We like to throw stones and etrogs during the festival of Sukkot. Okay. It's the fall of Gamala. Let's read about it. Once again, my apologies for reading so much. I hope you guys are still awake. Okay, so here we go. The Romans brought up the battering ram and began pounding against the walls of the city. The ram opened up a breach. They poured in through the breach. The Romans, it's good on you. The Romans found themselves squeezed out of the streets and retreating into the houses that hung closely compacted together on the steep incline of Gamala. Soldiers trying to escape those narrow streets took to the rooftops of the houses. But under the weight of these soldiers, the roofs began to cave in, and then the houses began to collapse. One collapsing house after another slid downhill to pile onto a lower house, which in turn collapsed and started an avalanche effect of rocks. Suddenly, the entire lower city of Gamala seemed to be sliding down the hillside. The landslide of stone and debris crushed Vespasian's men. Now listen to this. In the thick dust, the soldiers of Vespasian panicked and attacked one another. How cool is that? That sounds like a miracle from Hashem almost, eh? But the defenders came pouring down the hill, picking up stones from the collapse and hurling them down on the battered enemy. Vespasian found himself with only his bodyguard around him, alone in the upper city and cut off from the majority of his forces below. Surrounded on all sides, Vespasian and his handful of men that ran to his aid used their shield to form a turtle shell to ward off the attacks, and they slowly backed their way down the hillside and out through a breach in the wall. We almost had Vespasian at that point. Well, not we, but the rebels. They almost had Vespasian at that point, but Vespasian was able to escape. Almost got him. It's like the stories of Hitler and how many times people almost killed Hitler as well. Something's happening. When it's Hashem's will, it's Hashem's will. No matter what we do, it's going to happen. On which day did he eventually get into the city? On Shemini Atzeret, the 8th day of the festival of Sukkot, which happens to be the same day as the 7th of October, when we had the massacre when the Gazans came into our cities as well. That exact same day. Shemini Atzeret is supposed to be our most joyous day of the year. The day when our joy abounds more than anything else. The whole Sukkot is the season of our joy, but Shemini Atzeret is the high point of our joy. On the 7th of October, they came and chose that specific day to kill, rape, pillage, and plunder in our cities along the border of Gaza. And it's the exact same day that in history this happened to us as well in the city of Gamala. Hashem's trying to send us a message here. So on this day, 3 Roman soldiers. Baron, do you want to add something?
Yeah, just they came on the 7th of October. They also came through a breach in the fence.
Yeah, 100%. And over the walls with the flying things. You have to learn from history, eh? So on that day, 3 Roman soldiers of the 15th Legion crept into the city in the middle of the night. They silently worked in the dark to undermine the high sentry tower, carefully removing the lower course of block. We were asleep once again. The tower fell with a mighty crash, and Vespasian sent Titus in through the breach at the head of 200 picked men. the defenders of the city threw stones and arrows, making it impossible for the Romans to ascend. But then it seemed as if God himself turned against them. A fierce storm wind descended upon them. The direction of the wind bore the Roman arrows against them and repelled their own arrows back at them. It's almost like a sign in heaven that Hashem was displeased with them. The strength of the wind prevented them from defending the precipitous edges of the citadel, and they could no longer see the ascent of the attackers. The people of Gamala despaired of escape, so they began to leap from the height of the citadel into the valley below, trying to escape. And many of them ended up dying, jumping, trying to survive and run away there. It reminds us of, with the Twin Towers, and the people were jumping out of the towers as well, trying to save themselves. Many of them died just from jumping. The same thing happened here in Gamala. They knew that capture meant death at Roman hands, or far worse, the slave markets where their wives and children would be sold to brothels and other degradations. Right. By winter of the year 67, Vespasian's forces had conquered all of Galilee. The surviving zealots and the freedom fighters fled to Judea and the safety of Jerusalem's walls. So Vespasian prepared his armies for the winter and turned his attention to Judea. That is the fall of the Galilee, which is something Yeshua himself predicted. Right, let me read this section to you guys quickly. Once upon a time, when some Galileans told Yeshua about how the Roman procurator Pilate had cruelly attacked and killed the people of the Galilee while they were worshipping in the temple, Yeshua replied to them saying, "Do you suppose that these Galileans were greater sinners than all other Galileans because they suffered this fate? I tell you no, but unless you repent, you will all likewise perish." Yeshua warned these guys a few generations earlier and said the exact same thing. Did they repent? Most of them did not. It was a wicked and adulterous generation. This is what Yeshua said in Matthew chapter 11 to many of these cities that we studied now tonight. He said, "Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the miracles had occurred in Tyre and Sidon, which occurred in you, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes." Tyre and Sidon, were they cities of Israel? They're up there towards Syria, right? Lebanon, that side. So they're not. It reminds us of the story of Nineveh. In Nineveh, the reason why Jonah didn't want to go to Nineveh was because he knew that the Ninevite Gentiles would repent. And he didn't want to go, and he knew that Israel was looking at impending judgment, and they didn't want to repent. That's why he didn't want to go to Nineveh. Right, so this is what Yeshua calls the sign of Jonah. When they asked him for a sign that the end is near, it will be the sign of Jonah, right? They spoke about that. He's saying here this message to them as well. It'll be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon in the day of judgment than for you. And you, Capernaum, will not be exalted to heaven, will you? You will descend to Hades. For if miracles had occurred in Sodom, which occurred in you, which I did when I was with you guys, it would have remained. Sodom would have remained to this very day. Nevertheless, I say to you that it will be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for you. Yeshua predicted this stuff when he was still alive, and yet today in our study, thanks to the writings of Josephus, we're seeing that all of it unfolded exactly as Yeshua had warned them, the entire nation of Israel. Those leaders in Jerusalem who decided to put together this conglomerate and send Josephus to come and defend the Galilee, they were preparing for war instead of making war on their evil inclination and repenting. Because they didn't want to repent and because they decided to put Yeshua to death and ban us out of the temple, this is what happened to our entire land because of those wicked leaders. It's unfortunate, but this is what happened, guys. So that is our study for tonight, guys. That is the fall and the war in Galilee. Now, this, of course, leads us into next week. Because these rebels over here suffered so much defeat, they all decided to run down to the safety of Jerusalem and the city of Jerusalem, and that's where we're going to pick up next week. So there's some horrible stuff we read about tonight. But trust me, it gets even worse next week. We're going to read about the starvation and the famine in the city of Jerusalem, building up to the final siege of Jerusalem, which I think we're going to be studying maybe 2 weeks from now, 2 or 3 weeks from now. We'll study that as well in the fall of the city of Jerusalem. So it's a lot of important background in material that we got today as well to help us understand what happened there in Jerusalem. And we got introduced to some of the important characters, Vespasian and old that Ben Gurion guy, that family member of Nicodemus. He's going to become important as well when we talk about Jerusalem and the 21 years. We prepared to be able to survive for 21 years under the siege of Rome. And because of our baseless hatred, we only survived for about 3, and we died. I lost our holy temple. But the spirit lives on, Baruch Hashem. So yeah, we're going to learn about that in preparation. I think, is it next week Sunday? I think next week Sunday is the fast day, the fast of Tammuz. Not this Sunday, but next Sunday is the fast of Tammuz, where we commemorate the 17th of Tammuz, the day that the city walls of Jerusalem were breached. So we're going to continue learning, and that begins the 3 weeks of mourning, building up to the 9th of as well. So yeah, hopefully you guys learned some stuff tonight. Hopefully it's not too depressing, but it's important to learn this stuff as well. So I hope you guys enjoy the lesson. No, we'll see you guys next week, unless anyone wants to add something. Everyone good? Everyone fine?
Thank you for speaking, Israel.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everyone. Good
Bye.
night. Hopefully we'll see you guys
Bye,
at
everyone.
Shabbos.
Good night.
Laila Tov.
Laila Tov.
Bye, everyone.
Like
Ciao,
us
ciao.
all.